He's peaceful and serene to a degree that only is rare in a person. And at such a young age. He's the same age I am. But Prabhupada benefited him so much. I mean, he knew the buttons to push and not to push because of their natural hesitancy to have anything public to do with Prabhupada. Because they would see us then as just going after their money or their fame, not giving them the real thing. So I tried. I mean, Prabhupada, by his example, showed me that, yes, the way to treat them is like this. Always give them, just keep giving them stuff, giving them. Never ask them for anything. Although one time, Prabhupada did call me in his room and he said, we only have one book. We have Bhagavad Gita. That's it. And maybe there was an act of devotion, but he said, Krishna book has been finished now for some time, and I got news today that it's ready for publication. How can we publish? We need this book. He said, I want you to go and ask George for the money for this book. That's the birds. Okay. That fits right in with the story, don't cut it. So then I said, oh no, Prabhupada. I said, the reason that we're this far with George and he's helped us so much to date is that I've never asked him for anything. I always wait until he offers. And he said, yes, he said, but we really need this. And I said, well, how much is it? $19,000. In those days, that was like saying $100,000. So I said, I don't really think it's a good idea, Prabhupada. And he said, yes, it is. You'll see, Krishna will help you. Watch this. So the next day, we had made arrangements to go look at marble. George had donated, or said he would donate a slab of marble for a new slab of marble for the altar, the Berry Place altar. Or maybe it was for Bhaktivedanta Manor, I don't remember. But it was a big slab of marble, and to help us select this marble, he had called on his friend David Wynne, who was the sculptor laureate of England, a very famous sculptor who designed the coinage and did those famous busts of Queen Elizabeth and of the Beatles too. That's how I knew him. So we went with David Wynne to the marble yards and selected the marble, and afterwards we went to David Wynne's house for dinner. And all this time I was trying to screw up my courage because I had one mission that day. How am I going to ask George for this money? He's curious. He is giving us this 3,000 or 4,000 pound slab of marble, and how can I ask him for something more on top of that today? So we got to the dinner and we were all finished with eating, and it was getting late at night. It was dark, and it was a long ways in Wimbledon, long ways from London. I still had to go, and so did George. He had to go all the way out to someplace, suburb. So finally I just did it. I said, George, I made Prabhupada the bad guy. Srila Prabhupada asked me to ask you if you would donate money to print Krishna book. And I explained what Krishna book was. And his face just increasingly got grimmer and grimmer. And I could see this whole thing passing through his face of, oh man, they're just another one of these groups. Here it comes. He said, how much? And then on and on, and then the room went quiet for a moment. Well, he thought about it and looked at me, fixed me with this really belligerent stare. And suddenly, the lights went out. All the lights in the house went out, and wham! This bolt of lightning hit the house. It's a true story. The whole house shook. It hit the house. The sound and the light were simultaneous. And we sat in silence for some minutes after that, stunned. The lights came back on. I looked over at George, and he had this huge grin on his face. He said, well, how much is it then? And I told him, and he says, well, what can I do after that? You know? And he came the next day and talked to Prabhupada about it. Prabhupada came to Portland, Oregon. My parents lived near Salem, Oregon, south of Portland. And he came to Portland, Oregon once to visit the temple there. And Donavir, who was the president, had arranged a radio program in Salem, Oregon with KSLM. And so we drove down there, and I had my parents come over and meet him in the studio. And so they sat in the studio and listened to the whole Prabhupada's talk. And actually, my mother came down to my wedding in Haight-Ashbury. Can you imagine this? This is the first wedding was Balaji and I in the Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco, in this storefront on Haight Street, near Haight Street. And it was a full-on fire yajna. You know, we weren't sure how to do it or anything, but we had wood burning there, and smoke was filling the room up. And ghee was flying everywhere, and rice. And my mother, the squarest lady in the world, comes down from Salem, Oregon, and finds her way to this place, and sits down with all these hundreds of outlandish hippies, and all this chanting, and noise, and kirtan. And actually, it changed her life very significantly. At first, she was very critical of it, but gradually she began to accept it. Till in her final years, she was very spiritually oriented.
Do you remember the interchange that happened? Did he greet them?
I don't. You know, he was very friendly, of course. Oh, I remember he said that to my father. He said, "Oh, you have produced such a nice devotee as a son." He said, "This will have very great benefit for you also." He said, "You will now be able to escape the pangs of old age, death, and disease, because your son will take you there." It's to your credit, he said. And he said, oh, and I remember he also said, you realize, don't you, that your son, he's the son of a very prominent attorney in Salem, Oregon, and he's a very intelligent and educated boy, that he has chosen this philosophy for a reason. He was implying that Krishna consciousness could attract the intelligence of anyone, that it was on a very high level. My parents appreciated that, the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. They knew I wouldn't do it foolishly. Although I was known to do crazy things, the fact that I stuck with it meant a lot to them. And then, of course, when my father got to come over and meet George and stay at his house, that put the icing on the cake. My whole aspiration in life was to grab as much of Prabhupada's attention as I possibly could, and be with him personally as much as I could possibly be, because I experienced my greatest pleasure my whole life in those moments. So I caught on early on that what Prabhupada really liked was to talk to important or famous people. Right in the beginning, whenever he would come to London, we'd have all these people scheduled for him to meet and talk with, and we could keep him there month after month by just saying, Prabhupada, we've got 3 months worth of famous speakers coming here, you have to stay. He couldn't refuse. Nobody else caught on to that. So, but sometimes I would take other devotees too. Many times he would, especially with scientists, Swarup Damodar would be the scientist, or Hayagriva would be the philosopher. Many devotees he played that way. But he knew I'd studied philosophy in college. So. He was a philosophy major also in college, Scottish Teachers College. He majored in philosophy.